Hi, it's my pleasure to welcome you to the role of HBCUs and minority serving institutions in diversifying the educator workforce. I am Dr. Ashlee Canty, and I serve as the Director of Equity Initiatives at the Hunt Institute. Diversifying the educator workforce has reached critical heights as a community, leaders, legislators, and universities have partnered to address the need for our educator workforce to be representative of the students we serve. HBCUs and minority serving institutions play a pivotal role in preparing educators and supporting educator diversity through their colleges of education. This panel will feature education and policy leaders that are working to move the needle on educator diversity through understanding the data, the impact of educator preparation programs, and the urgency to ensure that BIPOC educators are supported and retained in the workforce. And retaining teachers is a top priority in every state. This panel will examine the pathways to recruiting and inspiring a diverse talent pipeline that can best serve our students. I will now invite our panelists to introduce themselves and give a little brief introduction on their work and how I didn't say that right, so we got to start over, or I'll say it again. I will now invite our panelists to introduce themselves and invite them to speak a little bit about their work and why this is important to them. We will start with President Fedrick.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, Dr. Canty. So I'm Marion Fedrick, president of Albany State University in Albany, Georgia. We're the largest HBCU in the state of Georgia. But more importantly than being the largest HBCU, we're also, our historical mission is to train aspiring leaders for our public service in communities, both in the Southwest region as well as throughout the state of Georgia. So at ASU, we're actually graduating the most nurses in the state of Georgia. And of course, right here in the seat where we sit in our county, Dougherty County, we're also placing the largest number of teachers right here in our county seat. Even with all of that and the work that we're doing with so many different partners, which makes us better at what we're doing, we can't do it without those partners. We still do not have enough teachers that are going into the pipeline for the classrooms that we have ready today for all of our aspiring teachers.
I am Senator Sonya Halpern. My district is 39. It is right here in the Atlanta, Georgia area in Fulton County. It's one of the most socioeconomically diverse districts in the state, if not the country. I am the proud daughter of two HBCU graduates, and so HBCUs are one of my biggest priorities in my work here in the Georgia State Senate, and understanding the importance of graduating a diverse workforce and understanding that education is, in my opinion, one of the biggest civil rights issues of our time is just critically important. So I'm glad to engage in this work and be part of this discussion today.
And Mr. Graham?
Thank you so much. My name is Daryl Graham. I'm the Senior Vice President here at Strada Education Network, or Strada Education Foundation, I'm sorry. We are a social impact nonprofit organization based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. And we recently started a fairly significant initiative we call Strada's HBCU Initiative. And we started this initiative in partnership with HBCUs to help the next generation of leaders to be developed. And it's great to see Dr. Fedrick on the call with us, because she is one of our pilot partners that joined this initiative. The key to this initiative is we do want to address, some of the gaps that we see in the development of the next generation of leaders. We believe that in partnership with HBCUs, we can make that happen. We also believe that educators in our communities are an essential part of that. And so happy to be a part of this conversation today.
Okay, so for our first question, we'll start with you, Mr. Graham. In recent years, historically Black colleges and universities and minority-serving institutions have received much attention regarding the role they play in providing space for their students to excel in their given industry. New research suggests the educator preparation training found at HBCUs may be part of what makes an effective teacher. Can you speak to the role that minority-serving institutions and HBCUs have in addressing the lack of educator diversity?
Sure. I think that many of the HBCUs over the history of their existence have played a significant role. As you will recall, there are several institutions that started as teacher colleges. And so we began to hear more about this work that many of the HBCUs were doing as a part of our listening tour back in the midst of COVID and the end of 2020 and into 2021. And the beauty, we believe, in where we are right now is the fact that many of our scholars, which we have over 180 scholars at over 50 institutions across 19 states now, have expressed interest in doing so. Many of them talk about the fear that African American students in their community have of math, and that they want to be a beacon of light to help to reduce those fears and go into teaching to help more students to be successful in that space. We've also heard a great deal about students being encouraged about the information that they're learning on HBCU campuses and in their communities about mental and behavioral health. And when we start to talk about these matters and issues that are highly impacting our communities around the world, the fact that we have young people, talented leaders, this next generation of leaders who are interested in doing so, and we have more than capable institutions like HBCUs who are ready to train and develop these young, talented people, then we have a recipe for success, and we believe that that will happen.
Thank you. President Fedrick.
Thank you. And as Mr. Graham said, teaching colleges is the core of what an HBCU it kind of stands, what it means for, what a lot of them were started for. It's a part of a lot of our core missions. It is definitely a part of the core mission here at Albany State University. So everything that our School of Education does is to really get a more diversified pipeline of teachers. And we do that in so many different ways. And I know we'll talk about that, but just to share some of it, when you think about where our K-12 systems are right now and kind of the challenges that they are going through with teachers retiring, we have a lot of retirees that are coming out of the school system. The way our students learn now is very different. They're learning differently than we did. I'm much older, but than I did when I was in K-12. And so when you think about that, then that means we need to adjust what we're doing. And so we have to be more innovative in our teaching methods. So we're teaching our teachers, our students, how to teach differently, how to approach the students differently. That takes resources, but when you're thinking about kind of historically where we've been and where we're trying to get to, we do have to make those investments in order to make those shifts. If not, even if we're graduating the most students of any HBCU in the state, when they go out, they're not going to be effective. And so we got to think about how to make them the most effective that they can be as they're coming out of Albany State. And one of the things that we're looking at when we think about teachers, but we also think about so many different types of jobs that are going to be available and that are available. So there's some jobs that we don't even know that are going to be here in 10 years. We don't know how they're going to look, how they're going to feel, but we do know that there's some core things that we can teach our students to be able to take those jobs, tool up once they come, but be able to take those jobs when they get out. And we're one of the few institutions, and maybe one of the only HBCUs that actually offer so many different degrees, from certificate degrees, your 2-year degree, and I hate to call it 2-year, but I'll say associate degrees, your bachelor's degrees, master's and specialist degrees. So I think when you think about the workforce of today, tomorrow, and where we'll be in the next 10 years, our HBCUs are just primed right now to start really getting our students that are in classes now, get them trained for that work that we know is going to come. May not know the job title, but we do know the foundation of the jobs that'll be there.
Thank you so much. And Senator Halpern.
One of the things that I think is really interesting to add to this discussion is the fact that our HBCUs and minority serving institutions just do a better job generally for Black graduates of really preparing them and nurturing them both for success inside of the institutions that they're in, and then once they graduate outside of those institutions as well. I saw a recent Gallup report that said too that kind of the economic mobility of our Black graduates from HBCUs is more than double that over the course of their lifetime than Black graduates from other institutions across the country. Regardless of whether that's the Ivies or the elites, our HBCUs and minority serving institutions actually are just preparing them better for success and that economic mobility as they go through their lifetime. And we're still really graduating, and more than that, accepting into these schools quite a number of students who are first generation students, second generation, third generation, but still a lot of first generation students who don't necessarily have the backgrounds at home to really help them in their college environment. And the nurturing environment that these schools provide really are the foundation for their success, that then allows them to come back out as graduates into the workforce and really contribute, be productive. And over time, centuries, right, we see that our HBCU graduates really become leaders, whether that's in business, whether that's in politics, whether that's in the arts, across every kind of industry sector. Our graduates from our HBCUs and MSIs are leaders in their own communities. And so when we think about just generally workforce development, and from a state perspective, then what are the needs and what are the investments that should happen in these schools? And I think that that's a really important driving conversation that we can be having and should be having. How do we really use our HBCUs or leverage them as the assets that they are in order to be able to contribute more to workforce development, economic development, community development throughout the state, understanding that we are uniquely positioned as the schools as they are to be able to make sure that we've got Black and Brown folks who are part of industries like teaching, which has historically been true, but also emerging industries that, as President Fedrick mentioned, that we might not even be able to imagine today.
Thank you so much for that. And our next question is specifically for you and the work that you've done, as you've alluded to some of the state work happening with HBCUs and the priority there. So in the state of Georgia, you've led several initiatives that include HBCU funding as a legislative priority, including the beginning of an HBCU caucus in the Georgia legislature. Can you speak to the importance of this for state legislators? What have you learned from this process?
So one of the first things that I was able to do, well, I've been doing, let me just say, I've been in the Georgia legislature for, this is my third year. So I'm at the top of my second term. From the very beginning, I have been looking for ways to make sure that leadership, and I am in Georgia, so this happens not to be partisan, but a Republican-controlled legislature and governorship. I have been looking for ways to make sure that HBCUs are a conversation that we are having on an ongoing basis. And so I started that by doing an HBCU Heritage Day in partnership with the governor to just bridge the conversation and provide a basis for ongoing conversation about our HBCUs. That ended up dovetailing into an opportunity to chair an HBCU study committee in the Senate on excellence, innovation, and technology at Georgia's 10 HBCUs. That's a combination of our 7 privates and our 3 publics, including Albany State University. And I really learned through that process of the study committee what some of the challenges are. We already know that, we are able to do more with less at our HBCUs, but really what does that look like on the ground, and how then can the state better support the growth and sustainability of these institutions, which are really anchor institutions in the communities in which they sit, and have served a really valuable purpose in graduating huge numbers of students, as we just said, who will go on for great success. And so really resources is an issue, infrastructure is an issue. So we started to really look and think about how can we make sure that beyond just this study committee, we are able to continue to have conversations to address these needs, bring in different folks, whether they're presidents of the universities or other experts, to be able to continue to be in conversation with us about the needs. And so the HBCU caucus, I'm excited about, because we are launching an HBCU caucus as a bicameral, bipartisan caucus, and that becomes a place where we can, again, continue to consider challenges, consider needs, consider successes, consider how the role of HBCUs can be even greater, how we can enlarge the role of HBCUs in many of the different areas in which we're focused on. And I mentioned already economic development, workforce development, community development. Again, how do we leverage these schools as the assets that they are, with all that they do to help the state even improve in those areas? There you have it.
Are able to not just think about the institution, but also the community. What happens with the workforce? What does that mean in terms of impacting Black and Brown students, but also just lifting up the narrative and the stories of the students that are there and the contribution that these institutions are making to Black and Brown and historically excluded students in a way that provides them support not only throughout their college, but also once they graduate. That lifelong commitment to support and to growth is so important to recognize, in the uniqueness of what the HBCU or MSI experience provides for all students and alumni. My next question is for Mr. Graham. You spoke some about the HBCU initiative that you are working with. Can you talk a little bit about how you all are able to use that initiative to support and develop school leaders and educators of color?
Sure. I do want to start by saying a huge thank you to Senator Halpern for creating the caucus and for the work that she's doing as a proud alum of an HBCU, Morgan State University in Baltimore. We often, don't give a chance to thank, our civil servants who do great work and help to support, the movement that occurs. And so I do want to say thank you to Senator Halpern for that wonderful work that she's doing. And so to get to your question, Dr. Canty, our initiative, it was our approach, I believe, that is making the difference in how it's working. To have almost half of America's HBCUs engaged in this initiative, having great leaders like Dr. Fedrick and others, be a part of our initial pilot, 28 institutions. It wasn't because there was resources, there were dollars, there was money. We went on an 8-month listening tour, and Dr. Fedrick played a pretty significant role in this, but we spoke to about 38 of the HBCUs across this country. We reached out to all 101 accredited HBCUs as a part of this initiative getting off the ground. And our goal there was to listen and hear what the needs were. We heard a great deal about, some of the steps that are taken as a part of the process of training and development. We heard a lot about, removing barriers, financial and social barriers that really help to make the process of education a bit more secure. As Senator Halpern said, many first-generation students are still going, to HBCUs, and so there are things that have to be a part of that training, ground in order for there to be success. There are things that we also learned as we host a leadership summit. First Strada HBCU leadership summit was held last year in Atlanta, Georgia, where we had about 170 presidents, points of contact, scholars, and other leaders come together to really help to enhance what students are already learning and what they're already having take place on campuses around experiences. We believe that experiential learning is going to be a very important key. We believe that work-based learning is significant. And so one of the things that we heard from Marion Ross Fedrick when we were doing our listening tour was the fact that rural institutions have a very difficult time in helping students to gain the experiences that they need. So one of the things that we instituted as a part of this $25 million 8-year initiative is internship support along with leadership development. And internship support is very important. We believe that it helps with the development of educators and others who are going into other industries, as Senator Halpern mentioned. And the key to that is we wanted the institutional leader And we wanted the student to have the opportunity to say, I may have this experience in order for me to get, what I need and to be ready to go into the workforce, to be an educator, as an example. But I don't have the resources to buy clothing. I don't have the resources to live in a place for 8 weeks. And so instead of turning it into just an internship, requirement for the initiative, we turned it into internship support, which is a very broad way in which we're allowing the institution to make a well-informed decision, case by case for that student. And so the key to what we believe is going to be success is many of the HBCUs have been around for over 100 years, some over 150 years. They know what they're doing. Our goal was to partner and come alongside and figure out a way in which we could create opportunities for more students and scholars, Black and Brown, to have the opportunity to be successful, to be trained in an appropriate way in which they would be ready to go. And so we've adjusted as a funder, and adapted to what the needs were of HBCUs and MSIs, as opposed to let's just tell them what to do because we have the money, right? So that's a very different approach and very different role for funders. I've been in the philanthropy world for over 20 years now, and very appreciative of our board, who actually approved this initiative at the very onset and said, you're going to have to go and figure out how you shape it. And we will work with the presidents and leadership teams at HBCUs to help to do that. So we believe that we will continue to see great success, and we'll see even more success because of the approach that we took and the partnership that we're making. And we hope that others will join us in partnership with HBCUs and MSIs to listen, to learn, and to move forward with success together.
I think you make two really good points. One about the presence of philanthropy and supporting community development and providing opportunities and access, because oftentimes just by simply providing access, there's not an opportunity, but really taking those two and intersecting them is really important to ensuring that the strategies that we're using are intentional and get to the outcomes that we're looking. I also love the mention of the listening tour. Working with the listening tour can be an extensive process. Outside of what you've shared today, were there any high-level things that you did not expect that came out of these conversations with HBCU leaders?
Well, everybody sort of believes that they know a great deal about what happens on HBCU campuses, particularly when you're an alum. One of the things that we learned is that the needs of students, has changed, and it was changing before we got to COVID. We learned a lot about not just the financial needs. Everybody talks about that, but it's the social needs that exist. It's the mental health needs that exist. And so we begin to hear a lot about sort of the changing dynamics that's happening with students, and it's happening on campuses, very real time. And what that made us do is it made us rethink how we were going to approach the initiative. But we knew that if we were going to be successful in partnering with HBCUs and MSIs for this great work, that we needed buy-in, from the leaders, the leadership teams, and everyone else, faculty, et cetera, on down the line. If you don't see yourself in it, it's very difficult for you to do it. And I remember when we returned in a discussion, and Dr. Fedrick can certainly speak to this better than I can, but I remember the look on the faces of presidents like Dr. Fedrick and others who saw how we framed the Strada Scholars Initiative. And many of them saw what they talked about with us in it. And so we truly believe that partnership in this particular sense is going to work very well, not just for the here and now. It's an 8-year initiative, but we believe that this is the start of something new, the start of something different that we can actually sustain going forward. And we're going to figure out how to do that. No, we're only in year 2. We don't have to figure it out now, but we're going to spend some time, with those presidents and those leaders and others who are interested. Love to spend some time with Senator Halpern and talk a little bit more about the work that she's doing. How can we incorporate a lot of what's being learned around the development of educators, development of leaders in tech, biosciences, pharma, you name the industry. We have many students who are ready for those industries, and they're being prepared and created with great opportunities and experiences to be successful. How can we do more of that? And how can we work together to make sure that not just first generation students, and too many exist to this day, but how can we get second and third generation students to really think about what the opportunities look like for them and where they could, excuse me, and where they could play a significant role in helping our society be better than it is today.
I think that collaboration is so important. Very fortunate with the work that I'm able to do and support teams, but also just hearing how philanthropy and legislators, that space is created for us to really think about some of these issues more broadly, but also to really be intentional in the way that we strategize and support those civil servants, those grassroots organizations, and those university leaders, and really moving the needle on creating experiences that are creating opportunities for students to really do the work that they want to do. Which leads me to my next question for President Fedrick. We've heard you've spoken a lot about all of the things that Albany State offers. And I think it's really great that you all have had such an impact on the state and the workforce. One of the programs specifically I'd love to learn more about is your Aspiring Teachers Academy. Can you speak to how this program was developed and the potential impact that this will have on the educator workforce in Georgia?
Absolutely. And before I start, there's a belief we have in higher education with HBCUs. We talk about head, heart, and hand, right? And it speaks to how we treat and teach our students. And I just have to say, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart, Mr. Graham and Senator Halpern have been, if we had an award that was that award, it would go to them. And I say that earnestly because how they approached us on all of these topics was phenomenal. We did sit back in some instances and think, is Strada serious about this? Are they really going to do this? They can't do this. And so we went through that. And Senator Halpern, before she even started the study committee, she was calling us and asking, can you sit down and talk with me for a little bit? And so they went out with information that others just had not gotten. And I don't want to say didn't bother to get, but they got information from us and then went forward, and we saw the information come back. We saw it for a circle. And so I always, want to take the time to say, please, if there's a way to take those approaches that you did and make that the model that people engage with us, going forward, we really will see the needle move, and we will see a workforce that's different than what we've seen, in probably decades. And it's because we're talking, we're figuring it out, and then they're supporting us. So I just want to tell you both, thank you for what you're doing for our HBCUs as a whole, not just Albany State, but as a whole. And I'll go to the Aspiring Teachers Academy. So Dr. Erica DeQueer actually kind of designed this academy, and which is phenomenal. And one of the things that she consistently speaks about is the value in the rigor that we need in education and preparing students to be educators. She talks about how we get those students out into the workforce, and not just getting them there, but how well can we get them there, meaning they are ready to be innovative. They visited other places. They know what is needed in other places, and they're getting those ideas and they're putting them in their toolkit, and then they're bringing them out into our communities, frankly, in Dougherty County, but also across the state of Georgia and even beyond. And so that experience is actually grabbing students, specifically students where there is a shortage, African-American males, students who want to do special education, students with English learners, EOL learners, our STEM teachers. We actually want to put more focus on grabbing those students, teaching them at a much higher level of rigor, maybe more innovation. We want them out at other schools. We want an international approach for those students. We literally want those students to know what's going on in other countries so that they can bring all of those skills back and infuse that in the students that they're going to teach in our local school systems and beyond. We look at how we can support those students because we do have a high level of students that are High Pell eligible. So in order to get all this extra, and Mr. Graham talked about it, experiential learning that we're asking them to do, we may have to actually fund that a little bit higher than some other institutions do. But we think it's so important that they have this type of experience above and beyond what's happening just in the four walls of a classroom. We want all this extra stuff because if we can infuse that in our students, teach our students that way, once they go to these schools, they're taking all of that with them. And so those students are better students, and those students are better able to then come back to us for college, hopefully, that they're teaching in K through 12. And that cycle, that life cycle continues. And again, we want to be able to teach students not just to be teachers, but, which is one of the most important things that we are doing, but we want people prepared for all these other jobs that are out there as well. The Aspiring Teachers Academy, we got initial funding from General Motors, actually helped us in that space as well. And we're kind of continuing to push and trying to build that. I want it to be a fabric, one of the just kind of fabrics of what we do at Albany State. That model will pay off, and it is paying off already.
About where you recruit students from, that you're using the data to fill in those spaces where teachers are most needed. And so it's amazing to hear that as you brought together this idea and with your staff and the students at the institution, that you can already see how you all are making an impact, and that is absolutely wonderful. Each of you have talked today about new initiatives, new ideas, research, data, funding, all of the things that it takes to make a program successful and an intervention or strategy worthwhile and something that is long lasting. Nothing that any of you have spoken about has short-term goals. There's short-term, there's long-term, but essentially you all talk about the sustainability of these practices. However, what you all have here is unique, as you all have worked together and listened and had the opportunity to engage with your key stakeholders in developing these opportunities. So the last question is, where do people start? If somebody wants to do this at other HBCUs and MSIs and other states and engaging state legislators, where should they begin? What small changes or big changes can be made to ensure that we're making strides to address the educator diversity shortage in all communities? I will start with President Fedrick, then we'll go to Mr. Graham, and then Senator Halpern will close us out.
Okay. I think some of the first things, and this is going to sound a little soft, but we got to have more courage. Because these ideas are actually different than things that we've done in the past. So start with the courage. I'm kind of from the school of thought that let's share all that we can. And I think HBCUs do collaborate. Let's do more of it. Let's do more of it. Talk about what we've already done, what they want to do. Even think about partnerships between our HBCUs and other institutions, but focus on our HBCUs and what can we do together in order to make this pipeline a better pipeline for our K through 12 students and beyond as well. I think partnerships with organizations outside of our institutions. We have to have businesses that are willing to partner with school systems that are willing to partner, our legislators, our private companies that are willing to support our institutions. I think that takes a lot of collaboration as well. And we need to be really focused on how we do that. And then I think when they're thinking about starting something, and you said it earlier, data. We have to be very focused on how we're collecting data, getting data, how we're using that data. It should be helping to infuse our decisions. And if it's not, then we're not really doing the things that we may not be doing the things that we need to do if we don't have the data to back that up and kind of have that pipeline going for whatever is next. I love collaborating with our local HBCUs and beyond, and really just nationally, because it helps us decide what do we want to do next. So we can compete in athletics, but we cannot compete when it comes to academics and getting our students to graduation. So I think collaboration and just having courage on where we want to go next would really help change the outcome of where we're heading.
Thank you. Thank you. Mr. Graham?
Sure. I'm a stop, start, and continue kind of guy. In order for us to get down the road, there are things that we should continue to do that work very well. Firm believer that data and outcome, should be a driver for us, and get away from how we feel and how things look, and talk about roles that do exist. And so I think one of the things that we did, and I think others, I'm going to talk to the funders for just a moment and say, we have to stop doing things just because they make us feel good. We have to start doing things that are going to make a difference in the lives and make a difference in the communities where we live, work, and play. If we really want to make significant change occur, then we're going to have to change the way we do business. And so this is a very different approach for us at Strada, and to submit to commit $25 million, to an initiative over an 8-year period of time, just so that we could see, what actually occurs and really, focus on the process that it takes, to develop, the next generation of leaders, and be in partnership over this period of time with the great work, the great legacy of HBCUs. That wasn't hard at all. And it wasn't hard to just say, let's not do a press release. Let's pick up the phone. Let's get on a call and let's have some conversation and let's just listen, and hear, what things are. And let's take this information and let's synthesize. So I believe that we have to begin to think differently. We have to begin to behave differently. We have to stop doing things that don't work. We have to continue things that are successful, and we have to move forward collectively together. And the only way that that happens is with true partnership. And so we believe that that is the next step for philanthropy, is to think about what true partnership looks like going forward.
Thank you. Senator Halpern?
Well, I am going to repeat a couple of things that we just already heard, but I'm going to start by saying that it's really easy to get really tunnel vision, like this is the one thing that we have to do, and not rise back up and look at the big, broad 50,000 feet view and really decide how the pieces are going to connect in order to create either, whether it's programs or in order to create, a movement that's going to allow for the changes that we want to see. I really think it starts with, kind of that broader vision. For me as a state legislator, I have found that collaboration is absolutely key. And I don't want to recreate the wheel. So if there are things that are working elsewhere, how do I learn about it? How do I engage with the people doing that work? And then how do I replicate that? I might have to make some shifts and changes because the environment I'm in might be a little bit different, but how do I replicate that? The HBCU caucus is a great example. We are really modeling that off of the congressional HBCU caucus, which is bicameral, bipartisan. We're modeling it off of that. So not recreating the wheel and being duplicative, I think, is really important. I would also say that having a lack of pride of ownership really is something that can drive collaboration. If we are willing to accept that other people have ideas, no matter who they are, that might be good and well-founded for the work we're doing, embracing that in order to drive a project forward. I too come out of a philanthropic background, so really do understand that you also got to have the data and the measurements to also support the narrative in the case that you're building. And so that combination, I think, is the most effective, powerful in being able to make the change. There's always going to be competing priorities. And so the question becomes, how do you determine which priorities have to come first, which things have to come first before anything else could happen, or what's the environment you've got to create to allow for change. On the legislative side, there has been such a wave of major, $100 million investments going back into HBCUs. It's really easy to slide into the thought that that needs to happen today, right now, for my state or this other state. But really, it's talking to the folks and understanding not just the outcome, but the input that led to that outcome. I said at a graduation recently, like, don't let the outsides of others, don't compare the outsides of others to your insides. Like, it's really easy to see the end result and not know what was put into it to get there. And that is where talking to people, creating those partnerships, whether those are individuals, whether those are corporations, that public-private partnership, I think, is going to be huge, continue to be huge in really driving forward the change that we're looking and seeking for. And so you got to be open to talking to other people, and collaboration is a two-way street. And so that is what I would say about that.
Well, thank you all today for being here, not just for just showing up today, but for the way that you show up for HBCUs and MSIs through leadership, philanthropy, legislation, and support. I know that the work that you all are doing is so important and so impactful, and that this next generation of leaders and educators will certainly make an impact on the world. So thank you so much, and we hope you enjoy the next session.